Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ISCM's third virtual town hall series, Gulf. The theme for today's discussion is Shaping Supply Chain and Logistics Strategies for Tomorrow. I would like to thank our strategic partners, Pedicin and Partners. As an institution, we are into education, consulting, and research, and we offer professional supply chain courses and certifications too. We would send you the details via email for the same and request you to log in to our website www.iscmindia.com. Certain ground rules for the audience and the attendees. As this platform is on listen-only mode, we would request you to type in your questions and send us via chat. We shall answer them post the panel is over. Let me go ahead and introduce you to our distinguished speakers for the day. Baljeet Nagi, Director, Supply Chain Oracle. Khaled Elsharkawy, Supply Chain Director, California Gardens. Krishna, Co-founder, VP Strategy and Global Partnership at LogisEye. Lorenzo Fornaroli, Senior Director, Global Logistics Strategy and Operations at Huawei. Shailen Shukla, a very well-known leader in Middle East region. Mike Jackson, Supply Chain Expert and ex-Head of Supply Chain at Huda Beauty. I would request Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman of Institute of Supply Chain, to lead the session and also request all the panelists to come up on the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third virtual supply chain town hall hosted by the Institute of Supply Chain Management. This is the third in the series, as you know. We have already dealt with supply chain and demand planning in the first series. We went on to look at supply bases and embedding resilience in your procurement. And the third one, we would concentrate on supply chain, end-to-end visibility, logistics challenges, and technology as a support to helping companies build more resilient supply chain. We know that this pandemic has been very different in nature. We have seen various natural disasters like the tsunami, like the floods, like earthquakes in Japan or floods in Thailand. And those were, a kind of natural disasters where businesses could build business continuity plan. This particular pandemic is slightly different. It is not like these natural disasters, and it is also not like the 2008 financial crisis, because if actually one analyzes the length and the breadth of this pandemic and its geographical as well as economic impact, one sees that this is something which happens very rarely. It's a black swan event. And what happens during this time is that though it starts with a supply shock, it becomes a completely demand shock in the long run, or the medium and the long run, and it creates a huge problem for business continuity and also business survival. Amidst this, I think the challenges has been enormous for the businesses across the globe, with 197, 98 countries being affected. What is really important to see that and also look at that, when world is attacked by such kind of black swan events, how do businesses actually react? What are the first basic reaction of businesses? In fact, all literature that I see it as a professor says that businesses jump to a business continuity plan, and hence everywhere, including UAE and the Middle East region, this has been a major process of reacting and trying to stay afloat during the pandemic. I start the panel discussion in this town hall with a basic question. I'll just go to Khaled first now. And Khaled, you have been working in this region, and you have you have been leading supply chain in the region. What do you think are the significant changes in companies' behavior over the past 2 months of lockdown and opening up of the UAE economy?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. For your question, I think the main change now is the focus on how can we have the business continuity, as you mentioned, and mainly looking for the long term versus the short term. So few companies before were looking on mainly the cost and how can we deliver to the consumer a better cost and a better delivery and improving our P&L of the company. And this in this situation, with having all the eggs in one basket, it impacted. It didn't help really. And in the long term, I think that we will focus more on the agility. How can you have a multiple? How can you have a multiple sources? How can you look for your diversity in terms of sourcing, and also focus on the vital few? So again, recently, at least in FMCG companies, a lot of companies wanted to do a lot of things at the same time, growing, having new innovations, looking for new sources. I think this will somehow change a little bit with the focus on, and people now are not focusing, or it's not easy to travel physically. Again, in FMCG, going to the supermarkets and retail and so on, we saw in the last couple of months a huge spike in terms of e-commerce, which is reflected all the backbones of the supply chain. And I think this will also have a major change in how we set up our warehouses, how we will do the demand planning, the forecast, and so on. So that's in a nutshell.
Thank you very much for bringing that perspective of both supply and demand planning challenges. We will go and debate that a little later. Let me go to Baljeet Nagi. Baljeet is a senior director with Oracle. Baljeet, what has been your views of impact of COVID-19 on Middle East, and how have your customers reacted in a period of uncertain demand? Because if you see what Khaled was saying, that they have adopted different approaches in terms of supply planning and demand planning. So what do you think has been the impact of COVID-19 on Middle East? From a very consulting perspective, you can give a wider perspective. Baljeet.
Sure, thank you, Rakesh. So thank you so much for giving us the platform to be with everybody today. Well, you know, the impact of COVID is global, you know, and it also depends upon what geographies you are in. And you specifically asked me for the Middle East. Well, you know, it all depends upon, like in the Middle East, you know, the oil is the biggest factor, right? The oil prices went down, the GDP went down, and also when you look at the types of industries that have been impacted as a result of COVID-19. In our part of the world, it is very much, you know, tourism, hospitality, travel, etc. And everybody's reacting to this in a different way, because, you know, all that is doing is kind of really impacting the economy. And yes, when I look at the travel and hospitality, you know how companies and organizations have to, sadly, you know, take cuts in salaries, lay off people, etc. Now, when you look at your other industries in terms of food, beverages, etc., you know, they really have to step up because it's a shock. What is it that they need to do immediately? And your question about how are your customers reacting? Well, I look at customers in a different way. We are also customers, right? We are customers, and I look at it in this way, because we've been in supply chain for a long time. You know, customer is the king. You need to satisfy your customer. And if I look at myself, what has happened to me or my family is a shock. And as a result of the shock, we're in an unknown situation. We do not know what's going to happen next. Consequently, as human beings, what do? Every opportunity we get, we hold things. Look at the example of a toilet paper, where people went and just hoarded toilet paper. regardless brands or anything. You're just going and shopping for the essentials. It's nothing about the brands. Now, when I look at from a business perspective as customers, now customers have to be really agile and say, okay, how do I actually, change my business to adapt, to make sure that I service those customers? Because as a result, new models are coming up. Do I have the capacity to fulfill the demands of my customer? What's the demand today? It's all online. So all of this, is really having an impact. And most of the supply chain, because this is where supply chain, even yesterday we were having our discussions with an oracle, right, in terms of saying, and I'm really passionate, for those of you who know me, about the supply chain. And supply chain was never really in the forefront. And this pandemic has really brought supply chain from the back seat into the driver's seat in terms of how do organizations, customers really take this opportunity to do demand planning, how do they manage their staff, visibility. So all of that is really, the impact of the situation, the pandemic situations we are in. Opportunity for all of us, whether you're customers, whether you are, organizations, to step up. And in the Middle East, I mean, this is exactly when I say, when I look at, from a business perspective, obviously it is a cash flow problem too. Do I have enough cash? And more so, how can I even run my business if I don't have workforce? So priority is looking after your workforce as well. So all of that is very interesting situations, very interesting times.
Thank you, Baljeet. That's a good summary of it. I think you have brought a very lively dimensions which will afflict humankind's in future in terms of managing the workforce, the human aspect of supply chain. Supply chain itself has come into a very strong focus. It has been the strategic element of the organization, which will drive the competitive advantage of different firms in different. And I thank God there's a realization that supply chain matters. Now, going back to the same question a little further, and I'll go to Mike. Mike has worked in UAE, Dubai, and Saudi, and he's handled a very luxurious beauty products. Mike, what has been your experience in those terms, in terms of Huda Beauty, now you're into a Saudi firm? What has been the major change and major challenge that you've seen during the period of pandemic?
I think looking at when the pandemic came about, I think it's having the agility to be able to ensure that you can look at different alternatives and different ways in, and be ready for things to change in a very short period of time. The Saudi border closes up and you need to find a way around it. I think at the moment you're only allowed foodstuffs and pharmaceuticals over the border by road. Where is your contingency planning been in the past? Yeah, have you actually been and planned for things? Not necessarily, you don't think anybody was ever going to see this happening, but where is your contingency planning for emergencies, for natural disasters? We saw this in the past with the dust cloud and those sort of things when everything closed down. And have we learned from those things in the past? And have we got the things, things in place? We know in the past that the Saudi borders closed. And looking from a UAE-centric point of view, the Saudi border closes every now and again, once every couple of years. There's an issue with it and you have to work around it. Have you got the contingency to go into air freight, sea freight to get goods into the different countries around the region? Where are your alternatives and where are your workarounds? Can you think a little bit outside the box and can we do it this way? And looking at costs, everybody in a normal situation, everybody's looking at driving costs down, trying to save fills on the kilo. Can we get the overall costs of supply chain down? But for me, and I always try and reiterate this even in the good times, that the main driver with supply chain is to get the goods available where they need to be sold at the right time. Obviously, you don't want to be cost to be over and you don't want to be affecting the bottom line. But if you don't get those products to where they have to be when you can sell them, then you can't sell them and you have no sales. So you've got to be able to get them in the place. And at this time, the service levels become the most important, not the bottom line and not the cost levels. So you've got to be able to get goods around and look at different ways around and how can you get things in, who's doing different things. What are the airlines doing to get around it? Emirates are putting cargo on seats in aeroplanes now, yeah, moving things around. So do you work with those guys? And it's looking at all your alternatives and being open to different alternatives. And hopefully that you've done some of this planning in the past so that you can roll it out as quickly as possible. And then you can become, you know, you can get ahead of some of your competitors that are just reacting to issues every time something happens. And have you thought about these issues? And I get what Baljeet says there. It's also it's the effect on people, the effect on your staff, making sure that you connect with your staff they're actually sitting at home. Are they okay? Yeah, talk to them, make sure they're okay, that you've actually touched base with them once a day, once a week, whenever you do, and have meetings with them. Be a little bit empathetic to their situations out there. You know, some people like working from home. Some people absolutely detest it and really don't like being on their own for whatever reason. And be open to those situations and be open to the change. And when we come out of it, you know, I don't think things are going to go slip back to where they were. So how do we work moving forward? How much of this working from home do we do remote working? Yep.
All right, Mike, I think good you brought about some sea freight and air freight as well as the work from home issues within this thing. I will go back to Khaled. And Khaled, you were on the point of demand planning and demand management during the volatility period. I think one of the major reasons has been that there has been a lot of behavioral changes within consumer, as everybody pointed out, including you. How has demand planning taken shape in the last 2 months in your organization and largely around your organization and UAE?
So demand planning changes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that volatility in demand changed for a few reasons. One of them is because of the panic buying, let's say, especially in the food and beverage, as my colleagues mentioned here. The other one is the channels that people are buying from. So if we talk UAE or GCC in general, the modern trade usually it's like a family outing. That's everyone go to the malls either at night or the weekends. That was where the main buying usually happen. Now the e-commerce, and we see the rise of a lot of platform and aggregators. Now this took a big share in the last couple of months. The third one is buying habit. With all the ambiguity that we see in the future, a lot of people are buying promotions, buying essentials, not top-notch brand. They are just focusing on items that we can pile up and store and doesn't cost us much. This reflected our demand in two things. So and the first, that we cannot cater for all the numbers of SKUs that we had before. So we need to focus on what is really helping this change in demand. So working on the promo products, working on products that can be picked and easily and can be stored for a long time. Plus, as Mike mentioned a couple of times, we have a lot of issues in logistics now, with the borders closing, with the ambiguity of how is it sea freight, is it air freight, whatsoever. So we had to create like hubs of products in countries. So instead of having the demand planning end to end, it's like pulling. So from the distributor to this hub, from this hub to the factory, and so on. So, and we are learning as we go. So it's because of the ambiguity, every day things change. So we put the rule for the day, and we know that in a week time it will be obsolete and we will change it again. So yeah, that's what we had so far.
Shailen, welcome. Khaled brought about a very interesting point, that planning, went for a toss. He didn't say so, but I'm just concluding from his statement. And we started planning for the everyday. And, supply chain planning for the everyday is one of the most admired dreams of technology service providers, when they say that use technologies to plan, reduce your inventory, have a flow of inventory rather than a stock of inventory. What do you think has happened in the market? And is this the phenomena that has been seen around, even including some logistics player and their warehouses?
Yeah, so people who were depending on single source have suddenly woken up to the new reality that you need to plan better, you need to de-risk. It's not just about China, I will give you an example. There was a TV plant in Egypt which was supplying primarily, the top 2-3 brands, supplying primarily to the GCC, and suddenly they had this COVID incident and the entire plant was shut down. And the only fallback option was then Korea or China, which literally delayed their supplies and they were out of the market. So single source is totally out. You have to be present in different continents. You have to have a business continuity plan. If plant A fails, then plant B supplies. If plant B fails, then plant C supplies. Because you can have a pandemic like situation in multiple continents, multiple locations. So you need to be ready for that. So I think de-risking in terms of locations, de-risking in terms of single source and multiple source. A lot of people who were very happy with lean inventory management will again have to rethink. But I'm happy to say that in GCC, mostly we never ran short of food. We never ran short of essential supplies, except for the brief period when people had hoarding mentality and they were hoarding masks and toilet rolls and all those things. I think the other challenge was the last mile delivery, in terms of the spike in March and April, when suddenly people started buying online. Sorry, you were saying something.
No, I said we'll come back to that a little later, but I think you can go ahead.
Yeah. So planning will change in this scenario, and you need to have a more agile planning rather than planning for 90 days. Maybe we need to plan for 30 days. More cargo will move by air and less by sea or other modes. As everybody is saying now, air is moving to Saudi, but road is a big challenge. So all those things you have to be very agile.
In terms of planning, we'll come to cargo and logistics a little later. But in terms of planning, I think it's forecasting dead, because most organizations have been planning based on forecasting, and there have been very deterministic methods of determining your plans. What happens to them, and what happened to them during the pandemic? If anyone, Mike, you can take this question.
Yeah, sorry, I just turned my microphone on. I think the planning one is a big one, because everybody wanted to forecast, and forecast was the big driver, and where you brought in your S&OP into it and all those sort of things. And I think you've got to be a little bit more creative on how you do that. And just going back, some people have done quite well out of this. Yeah, I think your supermarkets in the UAE have done extremely well out of this. They're a lot busier than they were. Your home delivery food people seem to be going crazy at the moment. You see delivery by motorcycles everywhere. So there are some people where they'll have seen massive spikes in their demand. And if you look around the supermarkets, I would say at an average, it's about 80% of products are available out there. I mean, there are some that are missing. You can see that not everything's there, but I think all the staples are there, and nobody's going hungry. So yeah, it's going to be difficult to bring in forecasting on a very sort of systematic basis. And anybody, what you get a lot of drivers is, and I think Baljeet touched on it, that supply chain's got a real big focus on supply chain now. It's the big focus within the companies. And you were getting a lot of push from finance saying you need to be able to forecast within 2 or 3 points of accuracy so that you can drive costs down. Forecasting is now becoming a little bit more of an estimation game, and we're having to use our expertise and our knowledge and go back and think, this is going to drive it up, this is going to drive it down, and you have to make your best estimations on it. It's not going to be a science anymore, because things have changed, and we just need to try and understand everything that's going on around to the best of our ability and make the best estimations we can with all the information we have, and then work around them when we have it. Yeah, if we have too much, if we have too little, what do we do? But sourcing product from one place in the world as well is a big point, or sourcing product from one area in the world is a big issue now, because you can't move things around the same as you used to. So maybe producing products in country is going to become more of a focus, even if the cost.
Let's remain on the forecasting for some time, and let me.
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah, I was trying to bring it all into one thing, but forecasting is not is a less of an exact science than it was, and it's going to have to be more of an estimation because you don't have the data anymore. The data's changed, so the data's not there. So the demand is going to be very difficult to gauge moving forward. And you want to know the demand in 6 months' time, 12 months' time? How many people are going to be here? What is demand going to be?
I
those
just
are the things that
bring
everybody in the business together. Yeah, you need to bring everybody in the business together to make the best estimation you can on that sort of thing. And it can't just be left to somebody modeling on it, either on an MRP or an ERP system or on a spreadsheet. That's not going to work.
Mike, I have a question to every one of you. Though forecasting may not be the right time darling of everybody, and I think it's thrown into the basket as a more deterministic rather than something which can be used during the period of resilience building. What happens if you see the GDP figures of most economies in the world, most continents in the world? You are finding that we are moving towards a Great Depression kind of situation where the economies are going to be affected. Now, when you say that planning has to be of people at a micro level, firm level, responsive, definitely yes, it has to be more agile, resilient, responsive, and efficient. But when you move beyond that and start looking at your markets and how the markets will behave, is there a role for forecasting? And what is the sort of forecasting that one would propagate? Anyone would like to take from this?
I can just add on my quote, but at least I will talk about my point of view in food and beverage. Let's say that forecast is not that, but it's half that, because at least we know in all our companies we have the high runners SKUs. The SKUs that you produce, it represent more than 50% of your volume. You will produce it, you will sell it, you will find demand for it at any point of time. So from our what we are doing now, we are defining this, which is like the 50% of our portfolio, trying to reach more. What are the products that we produce anyway, because we know that we can sell anyway? Then the noise, instead of having as the overall noise or the big problem of what we're gonna do in the next months, it will be only what we're gonna do in 40-50% of the next months. Another big factor is not everything we can produce now, because it's either the raw material availability, it's because of the logistics, because of whatsoever, and not everything that we can sell now. So we add the two lenses in the mix, and we get out what will be the most reliable forecast. And as I mentioned, that's what we're gonna do. What we are doing now, next month, it will be a different game. So we'll see what will happen there.
Khaled, I think that's interesting, because that takes us to your previous point and everybody's point that it's a more hyper-local approaches to planning, and businesses are looking at single-minute, hyper-local, and immediate planning in the near term. I think the short term and the long term is still a thought which is not coming to people's mind because the challenges are enormous. I think we'll take it up when we talk about supply chain planning and technology a little later. But before moving ahead, Krishna, if you have any comment, you can just let us know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I have a view more from a ringside observer. I've been handling practice which is intralogistics, so I've been using logistics services more from a consumer point of view. So what has actually happened is that there is a saying in the military, right? It says that all the plans are great till the first shot is fired, and it says that actually every plan is good till the time actually the battleground is hit. Then it's all about improvisation and quick thinking and the agility. It's not to say that planning is bad, but actually what has happened is that the method by which we were planning was quite relevant at a point of time. Now there's a change in the marketplace which nobody has expected. No one has anticipated Corona. people would have expected economic ups and downs, upheavals, changes in localized environments, maybe some prediction of natural disasters, but not a pandemic like this. And if you really see it, even if you compare with the greatest events of the world, like World War I, World War II, the impact on human life was much higher there. And there was a lot of material loss in terms of destruction. But in case of Corona, it's fortunately so far it's quite controlled in many countries, and hardly there is any material loss. One of the things what has actually happened, if you see, is that there are industries which has got benefited. Mike was mentioning about restaurant business. You look at the business like Zomato, which is an aggregator of food, maybe Deliveroo, who is the last mile delivery of the food. They have been having a lot of business. So what actually happened is that they had a layer of technology, and that actually has saved them. And one of the things which I think could be of interest is that if you categorize our consumption into two broad buckets, you have a bucket of need and you have a bucket of want. Yeah. For example, your cooking oil is need, and your essential, your perfume oil is want. The thing is that your margin on essential good is very low, and the margin on luxury product is very high, and the economy actually needs that kind of margin to turn. There was a recent study which said that after Corona, Britain saved an estimated 50 billion pounds, which is a very good thing. But it actually means that 50 billion pounds did not come to the economy. So one of the challenge I would feel is that the consumer spending habit, and therefore the way the demand is going to be managed, like Khaled rightly said, you will have to actually move from possibly quarterly forecasting to maybe daily forecasting, hyper local forecasting, very localized forecasting. So these are some of the challenges which I would foresee as an outsider.
All right, I think that's a very simple and very well elaborated, framework. And I will come back to this debate a little later in terms of channel dynamics. But let me go to Lorenzo. And Lorenzo is Senior Director Huawei and heads logistics and supply chain. What has been the major impact on global logistics during this period of time, Lorenzo?
Good morning, everybody. I think
in Dubai, he's based in China, stuck in Dubai, so he understands the problem of the overall pandemic impact. So here is Lorenzo.
Yes, good morning. Yes, also had a personal impact because of this. So I think essentially there's been changes, as we discussed, across both upstream and downstream in the supply chain. So we talked about consumer behaviors. We talked about how upstream the supply chain has been impacted. We can look at the impact to logistics, which means physical distribution. So in terms of mode of transport or selection of ports, alternative ports or airports, which have determined decisions that had to be taken. We talked about procurement, which means, like we discussed, a single sourcing, or if I even go with a single sourcing, where do I hold my stock? Do I only have one stock location, or do I want to have the same supplier providing stock across different locations? What's my inventory stocking policy? For example, in some previous companies that I worked with, we had one single SKU in one single location, then we had a sort of a mother warehouse that was supplying other child warehouses around the region. Maybe when I start having multiple SKU locations, multiple locations for the same SKU, which means a compromise from a working capital perspective. And you know that when you talk about working capital, especially for companies that are listed in the stock market, of course, that's a big impact, because of course they want to keep very lean working capital figures, very good cash flow. So this will have to determine some changes in that sense. Should we consider, for example, VMI from our suppliers, so that we would have easier access to products unless you work in a make to measure? So if you're on a make to, if you're a make to stock, you can do that easily. If you're in a make to order, then it will be a difficult one, having a VMI, practically impossible, let's say. So there's a lot of changes that have come about this. I think the biggest one has been a big test on the efficiency of S&OP overall. and the efficiency of scenario planning, like we discussed before, or business continuity plan, which means how do I plan for scenario A, B, C, like Shailen was discussed earlier. And again, I remember I was once at another event and they asked me, how comfortable are you? Do you think you are at 80, 90% of your risk management? And I said, I don't know, because if I knew that I'm at 90, then I would be able to plan for the other 10%, right? So the fact is that you never know how good you are. So you just have to be as imaginative as possible in building several scenario planning so that if one doesn't happen, you can enact the other one. The problem is not only the planning, but the actual putting it into place. Because if you want to put it into place, what does it take to make it happen? What would be the decisions that you have to make happen fast in order to have a responsive supply chain? And if so, do you want to start considering, is this scenario planning, say B, is this becoming the new supply chain, or do we then go back to the previous one? So you'll have to be able to plan and potentially consider that the scenario planning you've enacted become the real supply chain. So there's a lot of changes which have impacted supply chains. So I think overall,
thank you, Lorenzo.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a good point, because we have been seeing that large number of companies in the global markets, not during the pandemic but earlier, have used scenarios in a big way to define risk in the future. Particularly, there's a very good Harvard Business School review article on Cell, how they have used scenarios to explore risk and explore opportunities and how to move towards different scenarios. I think one thing that's very, very clearly coming, what Khaled said or what Shailen said, was that everybody is building a near-term scenario. A single day, single minute plan is also a scenario. How do you really look this into a long term and put them into the long term is a learning that needs to come into the organizations. Moving forward, I go back again to Shailen. Shailen, you have been a keen watcher of logistics within the region, and I think you are one of those through whom I get a lot of literature on the regions on the LinkedIn. So I think you are a guru in a way to me, because there is a learning of a lot of trends that happens to it. I think that's a great service. Could you take us through the logistics dynamics in the Middle East and probably Dubai in last 2 months, and what are the trends that you see it forward? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rakesh. So primarily there has been an emergence of e-commerce operations throughout, and most of the players who were like FMCG distributors, grocery, and including so many other pure play e-commerce were found napping. Why? Because everybody was playing on prices, everybody wanted a lower cost, and suddenly the demand went up by 10 times. So there was no capacity available in the market to do that. So all those players who were working on their own were very successful, but all those who were working with third party had a little challenge, because third party operators also cannot overnight increase their capacity when the volumes are gone up by 5x, 10x for so many of them. So as a result, on the pure play e-commerce portal, if you go and order something, you were getting delivery days of 15 days, 18 days, 25 days. But luckily, as I mentioned earlier, also the food supply chain was a big winner in this, because we had Ramadan in between, and overall food delivery always had those windows where they operate of the lunch hours and the dining hours, and maybe they were not delivering in half an hour, 1 hour, but they were still delivering, and most of the orders were fulfilled. So food was clearly a winner, which is like the on-time demand, courier delivery, where you have to deliver in 1 hour. The biggest second emergence was the grocery players. So many new grocery players came up, and they were delivering in time. And all the big ones, I don't want to name them, were struggling with their inefficient websites, inefficient linkage with their inventories. If you buy grocery, and if the big ones are promising delivery after 7 days, then naturally you will not wait for your staples for 7 days. So there were people who rose up to the challenge, and they were delivering milk and bread and other things Like I'll give you an example of Talabat, which was delivering milk and all in 40 minutes, 50 minutes, very efficient. All other grocery players are doing very well. So grocery delivery, which is one of the largest delivery service across the world, has probably come of age or will come of age due to this pandemic. And all those players who were not really prepared, who thought that we are brick and mortar and we are okay with this, or those who were omni-channel, but not, their e-commerce was not very big. They suddenly realized that the malls are not giving discount on rent, the sales have fallen by 50%, and the e-commerce, which was 2%, has gone to 10% or 20%, and you don't have the wherewithal to service it, the catalog management, the price management, the delivery management. So all those things have come in for last mile delivery services. Probably will have to ramp up capacity in a big way, because after the peak of March, it has stabilized at a much higher level. Delivery levels are still, maybe they have come down from 10x, but they are still 2x. So this is here to stay. So people have to wake up. They have to realize that we have to live with this new normal. And also, earlier, as you remember, in demand forecasting and all, we used to say that inventory is poison. Don't sit on inventory, otherwise someday it will kill you. And all those guys who were sitting on inventory have, laughing their way to the bank, and they're very happy. And all those people who made wrong forecast were having excess capacity, were doing very well. And across GCC, I believe there were no food shortages. There were no shortages of any essential items, food products, grocery, everything was available. And also the geography is easy to maintain. Like I'll give you an example of UAE. UAE never had 100% shutdown at any point in time. The grocery, the e-commerce, the pharma supply chain, they were always exempt. So I think these are the few pointers that last mile delivery has been ramped up. E-commerce players from brick and mortar will have to be omni-channel. Capacity has to be ramped up, and grocery and food delivery will come of age in this time.
Khaled, any comments on this quick one?
No further comments, and I just wrote a couple of points, which is the make to stock, and people now are enjoying the stock. So maybe it was a pleasant mistake for whoever did this mistake. Got a lot of business for the company. Yeah, but yeah, nothing else. Thank you.
Yes, Baljeet. You have to unmute yourself.
Well, I think I would answer that question when you ask me the next, because the thing is, what you all are talking about, if I may, it is all about, the time it's an opportune time where I would look at the businesses have now identified, and if they haven't identified, their weakest links. This is an opportunity and environment where organizations, whether they are small, medium, large, they should be at a point where I now say, okay, what are my weakest links in supply chain? And if I
Thank you. I'll come back to you. I think this is the point that we wanted to come in here as a debate. And I think I'll bring Lorenzo in here, and because he made very significant point about what Shailen was saying, that inventory was their boon, and I think they're sitting on inventory. But I think one or two things that come to my mind as a debate right now is that I think firms have enjoyed this inventory, but their vulnerability in the supply chain has been exposed, and we need to talk about it when we save the future strategy for tomorrow. Two, if you really look at inventory, now there has to be a trade-off between inventory and working capital. Lorenzo brought about this concept very well, but I think, Lorenzo, what are your views on too much inventory as a boon for businesses, and will it alter the paradigm? It is the big question.
I think, well, it's a very difficult question to answer. I think I think certainly there will be a lot of considerations around physical location of your suppliers, the lead time to replenish inventory, the stocking policies, the SKU rationalization will also become important. Do we need to have all those SKUs for the same product? Can we reduce the differentiation and be better at forecasting? A lot of uncertainty, of course, regarding consumer behavior. So we need to inject more technology to predict customer demands when possible, especially when it's very diversified in the consumer business. And there will be a lot of conversations that public companies will have to make, because a company that is not private can take its own decisions around inventory availability. They can build stock, they can buy supplies of products or components for their own strategic decisions, and they will not be under pressure from the shareholders about the impact that this has on working capital. If you are a public company, you have to start balancing the lean concept versus the agility that everybody's talking about now. So you need to start understanding how can we build this trade-off in our system. So this will be, I think, the next big effort of the S&OP organizations in the future, because they will have to start understanding what is the best trade-off between volatility in both aspects. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that has been a brilliant direction to the debate. I think there has been a thinking, and among the supply chain practitioners and thought leaders across the globe, as I've been following, one thing that comes to my mind is that everybody is talking about agility, traceability, mapping, and there has to be some decoupling point. So I think Shailen might be right, but then there has to be a decoupling point. And if you have to have a decoupling point, you have to have your forecast or demand frequency, and that demand frequency will determine your decoupling point, which could be the agility principle in the future. I think there is a reshaping that needs to be done there, along with scenario planning. A huge decoupling based on near-term data and reacting to the market would be much better, and what that would take in order to inventory, and what would be the impact on securing supply, securing demand, and also unlocking funds, because you need to have funds to manage your business and funds to manage your supplies. And I think this is one area that really comes to in this thing. Now, having said this, I think Baljeet has to go within an hour, so I will come back to her issues and take the debate a little further. Baljeet, it has been said, and large number of players like you have been saying that one of the weakest links in supply chain has been exposed. Technology is the way to go forward. How can technology and the new age technology in terms of digitalization, IoT, and SaaS-based platforms, how are they going to help businesses become more resilient? Till now, most EPOs were deterministic, as we talked about. How do you make them more resilient and more opportune for the coming future of supply chain? And how are they going to define the future of supply chain? Yeah,
thank you. Yes, thank you. Without a doubt, the buzzword that everybody is using is resilient. Resilient supply chain, resilient this, everything is that. So I know you all gentlemen were passionately, especially you, Rakesh, passionately talking about demand, supply chain planning, etc. Well, technology plays a pivotal role here, because it's, as I said, it's a wake-up call, and it's no more a cosmetic surgery. Because if the organizations haven't stepped out or haven't thought about, and they're just doing cosmetic surgery to change their business platform, now is the time to really make sure cloud is the way to do it. You need, because what are we talking about today, in whether it's supply chain or whether it's your business as a whole, right? You need to have an end-to-end visibility of your business process. Whether your business process is demand planning, forecasting, end-to-end logistics, it's a business process. How can you even do demand planning or forecasting if you do not have a visibility of your data? data is an input of planning, right? And if a little guy is just sitting with his Excel spreadsheet in a corner somewhere, and he's so rigidly just doing the inputs from God knows how many years, saying, okay, these are my parameters, my inputs, etc., that's not going to suffice in today's day and age, because all of these things has to be connected. And data, big data is a pivotal part. And my colleagues mentioned today, when you do demand planning, forecasting, it's no longer a one-man exercise. Everybody has to collaborate. Now, this collaboration, this is all about technology. You need to have the underpinning technology to have an end-to-end visibility. Now, the other thing which I talked, what I like to also mention too, is emerging technologies are playing a pivotal role in the digital transformation. Now, so let's look at the example that I think Mike was saying on logistics, right? Different types of freights, air freights, sea freights, etc. And how do I actually capitalize on it? In terms of how do I know that I've got the capacity? How do I know if I'm taking from goods from A to B, whether the estimated time of arrival is right? How do I know my goods going from A to B if they are perishable goods, they're not spoiled, etc.? So this is where we're looking at emerging technologies like IoT, artificial intelligence, big data, and in the logistics world, which I know Shailen's very passionate about. We talk about what is logistics. It's just kind of it's a means of transport, taking last mile delivery, etc. But the thing is, when you look at logistics, you need to have the extra, a flavor of, emerging technologies, because, as I said, IoT plays a big part of it, in terms of, your type of vehicles, and also track and trace. Track and trace is the big thing underpinning blockchains. So all I'm just saying is the time is now. Whether you're doing forecasting, planning, logistics, etc., you cannot do it in isolation. The business platform underpinning has to change. And this is the message we are giving to our customers as well. It is a change, it's a big time change, and no more room for doing cosmetic surgeries. And what do I mean by that? Having a sort of a multiple platforms. Because if you have that, you lose the visibility. So this is very much, from coming from a business, coming from, the vendor we are. I mean, this is really everybody has to step up. And I think Shailen mentioned, somebody mentioned that if you are not in the game, then competitors are going to take in, because these competitors, they don't carry baggage, and they are very savvy. They come in with a lot of emerging technologies and tools that are so important in today's pandemic world that we're living, because it's no longer what we used to know, and we don't even know what the future is going to be. So if you have the underpinning business platform to be flexible and then capable to meet any disruption that's thrown at you, you have the capability of, being flexible and coming up with new business models. Can't hear you.
Rakesh, you are muted, Dr. Rakesh.
You are mute.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. Krishna Raj, how do you really use technology and predictive analytics in logistics today? Given, if you see, the debate has been on efficiency ground, on transparency, visibility, and also on human ground. How do you make it more human?
Okay, maybe a good example could be what we are doing right now. Like we have 6-7 of us who is possibly working from home, in our home attire, and we have maybe close to 100 audience who are actually tuned into our show already. And the world is still coming out of the lockdown. So how it is happening? It's actually happening because of digital. If there was no digital, there would not have been a transmission of this program. There would not have been people who would be listening to it. And one of the things which we would have seen that this pandemic has been devastating for a lot of businesses, but you could still see a trend where some of the businesses did much better. Some of the businesses went unscathed. So leave aside the businesses which are providing emergency aids, which naturally would see a demand. But there are other businesses like food delivery. There are businesses which are delivering essentials. They were doing much better. So though there are two categories of companies, one category of the company in the same business did well. And the difference is their ability to actually capture demand, go digital, and delivery. So if you really see the supply chain, all of us have been the supply chain for a long time, it's always been in flux. It's not that it's anything new. Supply chain is always in flux. It is typically because of the dynamics between what's happening at the consuming side and the producer side. So you could have disruption in the category. For instance, some time ago, to give an instance, there was a disruption for one of the mobile phone manufacturers. They had to do a large-scale recall, and there were a lot of people who were trying to upgrade their mobile devices, and that plan changed. But it also actually provided an opportunity for competing brands to come and fill in that place. So their success really depended on how fast their supply chain could act to fill in that gap, so that the consumers who are already wanting to upgrade their mobiles can buy their products. But one of the things which has really changed this one is the overarching reach of the disruption here. It's no longer local. It's no longer local. And one of the reasons why it has happened is that we're all interconnected. We're all interconnected. So what happens in possibly China would impact us here, and what happens in Brazil would impact us here. So this has actually exposed some of the vulnerabilities. Somebody has already mentioned that the vulnerabilities have come out. And one of the ways you could possibly handle this vulnerability, not completely, you cannot mitigate it completely. It's often said in the case of COVID-19, prevention is the cure. Yeah, there is no vaccine which is found at the moment, but we can work on that immunity. And the digitization is going to give us that shot of immunity. It's not going to make us that completely immune from the diseases, but at the same time it will make us much stronger. So you look at,
I think that's a good point.
Yeah, you look at what's happening at the moment. There are companies which are doing far better because of the digitalization. There are companies which are still waiting for SOPs from the government to revive them. These are all external leads, but what you build inside is going to actually help you. What you're going to get from outside is going to only last a little bit longer, not too much. Think of a restaurant. Maybe you are having extremely good, tasty food, but if you do not have a delivery mechanism in a time like this when everyone is locked down, there's no way you are going to deliver food. There's no way you are going to deliver food. So you have to be listed. You need to have a delivery mechanism. You need to have last mile channel which is set up. And as the countries are coming out of lockdown and it's unlocking, and possibly some of the channels which existed earlier may not be existing anymore. So a whole lot of pressure is going to be on online, on the last mile delivery.
Thank you, Krishna. And I think that's a fair point, and I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think both of you brought about connect your people, asset and data, gain new operational visibility, speed up work, improve accuracy, make better decision making, and make better last mile connectivity as well as delivery. I think technology is going to play a big role. And before I go to the next question, I just got a question from somebody which is relevant to the panel. So I would ask Baljeet to take this one. How do you think technology as AI and big data will change the supply chain, and how supply chain jobs will evolve? This is by Edie Brandon and Baljeet, if you have a quick answer to that. I think Baljeet has left. So Shailen, would you like to take this?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
how are businesses going to be affected by AI and automation and other technology? And how are the jobs going to be impacted?
I think AI should play a big role, and automation also will play a big role. And as I have been saying earlier, that all those CEOs who are asking for an ROI for an automation case, I would like to give of Ocado in UK, which runs one of the world's biggest automated warehouse. There 80% of the staff in UK dropped out because of this COVID pandemic. Either they were affected or they were not able to move out. But the fulfillment rate did not go down because they had a totally automated facility and they were the winners in the end. So automation at some point will be a question of existence. It will not be a question whether you are able to get an ROI, and the CFOs and the CEOs who ask about an ROI, it will become irrelevant. So automation will have to be the way forward. And another thing is that, in terms of AI, I think we are barely using 1% of the capacity or the capability which AI has. So businesses, especially SMEs, will start using AI more, as also it will become cheaper to access. The cost of usage, the penetration of AI will go up. So that way, I think a lot of unpredictability in the forecasting and planning will go out, and a lot of agility will come in, because you cannot plan for long. So I think these two technologies will have a big role to play in future.
All right. I think there was a subsequent question to that, which says that what would happen to the jobs? And anyone can take it. Maybe Khaled or Mike.
Okay, I can take this one. So, as mentioned, or as we are talking about technology being in the middle between the suppliers and the distributors as a manufacturer, I think it will need, in terms of jobs, I don't think it will impact many, unless like the direct jobs, but it will need to have a different capability. So either different skills, how can you operate the technology itself? So that's one, and accordingly reading the data in a different way, because as Baljeet mentioned before, we have a lot of planning now is done by someone who has 10 meters square of Excel sheets, 100 cells, 100 rows, and trying to get the data out. This will be a push of a button. Then the analyticals and logic thinking, problem solving skills will come to place. If you have a lot of data, how you will make use and benefit of it. Also, one challenge I see it is, if we want to have like the end-to-end visibility, starting from the point of sale and how this will reflect to the distributor, to the manufacturer, to the raw material supplier, there will be a lot of multiple platforms that need to be integrated, and understanding how every platform from different companies work, because at the end of the day, we have few suppliers for ERP, and how this ERPs talk to each other, and how the technical support there. This will be, again, a new function that I see will play a big role, understanding the data in a different formats, able to process it. So yeah, that's in terms of skills, and I believe that as we go, new skills, and we'll get better understanding for what's really needed and what the technology, because now we say AI, IoT, cloud, and all of this, we will get, okay, what's the real application of it? What is it on the real ground? As we start implementing, we see it implemented, having couple of years of experience. I believe our understanding will be different. The skills will be different too.
Thank you, Khaled. I think that's a very great intervention in the terms of capability building and workforce preparation for the future. I think data interpretation more than data collection would become an important strategic tool in the future. Mike, let's go to the last segment of our question, which essentially should be the first segment. I put it at the end, is about sourcing. And all of us have referred to it in one element or another, the single sourcing. Even if there is a single sourcing that is there, when it can be of help, to world has moved to specialization and economies of scale in such a way that not only there is a single source supplier, but there is a single source country. So if you need options, you have option only in China, for instance. Now that is another problem. Diversification has not taken place in a very big way. And even if diversification has taken place, as Shailen was telling me earlier, I think, and some of the panelists or earlier town halls spoke about, that as UAE is global, as many nationalities resides there, as many nationalities you source from, I think your single source could not be just China, it could be US, Europe. And in that sense, a global sourcing can impact. How do you actually assess supplier risk in such a situation? Do you really need to diversify post-pandemic, because it must be a knee-jerk reaction to the pandemic? And do you really see localization happening? Because a lot of people say that there's a lot of technology, including automation and 3D, which may lead to reshoring, which has been happening. So I'll take each one's view on this one by one. I'll start with Mike. I think we have 1 minute for these views.
Right. I think a lot of views there, but I think you're going to have to look at staging products down the supply chain and at least holding some buffers at the different points in the supply chain to cover litigation, but mitigate the challenges. But one point that we had with the cosmetics industry is most of the production of cosmetics worldwide, or a large proportion of it, is in Lombardy in Italy, just outside Milan.
Mike,
and that was the center.
Your mic is a problem, Mike.
Pandemic.
I think we are not able to hear you. Just see. I'll come back to you a little later. Shailen ji, what do you think of single sourcing, and what are your views on de-risking as you talked about earlier?
It was a
I was reading on the website of BVL recently. There are three vulnerabilities, which we have to take care of. One is the lean management. So lean management could be an opportunity as well as a challenge. So as you were mentioning that, we need to have multi-source, multi-country, and lean management has to be managed more efficiently so that in case of pandemic-like situations, it doesn't affect us. The second is the complex supply chains. FMCG can have, 10,000 suppliers. An Apple iPhone is deferred by 1 month, even though China is working, but still the launch is deferred from September to October, because the supply chain is so complex that 1 out of 1 million suppliers, something goes wrong. So you don't have that complex supply chain visibility. And also in your planning and in your end-to-end supply chain, you need a higher level of visibility. So maybe, by using various tools of collaboration and supply chain visibility, visibility has to come in a big way, so that you have a control not only on your supplier, but the supplier's supplier, whether he is working okay, whether he is efficient, what vulnerabilities he has. So these three things, lean management, complexity, and lack of visibility, need to be managed in a much better way.
That's good, very good. I think that mapping is a very important element of de-risking in the future. But Mike, can we hear you again? There's a problem with your mic, Mike. I think so. I think there is a sound problem.
Is that better?
Yeah. I'll come back to you later, Mike.
A lot of the other ones.
There's a problem. Can you just put your mic properly? Lorenzo, what is your views on this?
I think actually already anticipated. I think we need to consider, if we go for a single source, or like Mike was trying to mention before he got cut out with the microphone, I think the single sourcing means we have to have a certain buffer of stock in multiple locations, because if we have one single source from one single location, that this could turn into a problem. So you want to have either buffer stocks, or going to have a VMI policy that allows you to have products readily available. Obviously, again, If you work on a make to stock, that's okay. If you work on a make to order, for example, the electronics, where you have late customization or strategic postponement, as they call it, then this would become a problem. You want to consider potentially, if you have more than one supplier, how do you get them both on your approved vendor list? Your negotiating capabilities will decrease. Which proportion of your SKUs do you go to which supplier? How do you leverage negotiation when it comes to rates? How do you leverage both inventories from both suppliers? So you'll have to start injecting complexity in your negotiations with your suppliers, but at the same time, you will have a certain level of responsiveness if another crisis comes. So I don't think anybody has the perfect recipe, but it's a mix of trade-off in terms of capital decisions around working capital and decisions around location of your stock or your warehousing locations in order to be able to find a more reassuring compromise to your policies. But single sourcing can be troublesome unless you have the same products from the same supplier equally distributed across the network to cut.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Khaled, do you think there would be some amount of localization in the supplies and suppliers that will take place even in the Middle East region?
So again, I think, as my colleagues mentioned, localization for everything, it will not be a viable option. Maybe the avoidance of single sourcing will be the way to go, because we cannot, if we talk about GCC, we cannot have a factory for everything in every country, but the way that we will be having it, maybe you can have a storage, a buffer, and even as a semi-finished product. So for things like that has a high customization, we can have the storage as an element, and we have an assembly line or customization line or so. I think this will be a more realistic option. Another option will be a localization for areas. So something like GCC, a company can set up a facility that serves GCC, a set up facility that serve Eastern Europe, Western Europe, North Africa, and so on. But that's for the companies that have a major scale. But again, it will not be a facility of all. I think that it will comes here to the role of that's a big opportunity for governments and private sector to redesign their network. So I heard about a lot of governments are now saying, okay, we have a good talent, we have a good infrastructure, and so on, and offering companies to set up facilities and to be able to serve Europe, for example, better, able to serve South America better, in order not to have a single source, but again, it will be like closer to the consumer or the customer.
I think we have lost the voice.
You're hearing me
we can
now?
hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, so that's my point. I don't think it will be 100% localization, but there will be a way in between, either having a facility, a regional facilities, or a regional buffer storage for semi-finished goods.
Thank you very much, Khaled. I think I'll go back again to Shailen. Shailen, do you have a view on localization in the Middle East or Gulf region? Can you hear me? Shailen, can you hear me? I think switch on your mic. Unmute yourself.
Apparently, you cannot hear us.
Can you log out and log in? Maybe that's the way to come out. All right.
Now it seems to be...
Yeah, now it seems to be better. So can you let us know what are your views on localization in the Middle East as a de-risking strategy in the supply chain?
I totally agree with Khaled that we'll have to go global. So be global while being local. So you'll have to have regional manufacturing bases. Like Saudi or UAE could be a manufacturing base for the entire GCC or MENA region. Same way you could have another manufacturing base for Southeast Asia. So that way, I think being local will help, will insulate you from such incidents, from transport shocks, from supply chain shocks. I think it's very important.
All right. I think with that, we have come to the end of the discussion points. We'll take a few questions for next 15 minutes from the audience. I think as they've been waiting and sending us a lot of questions to us. Fanikar, we are talking about multiple source location. However, we have noticed that situation like pandemic where everything is standstill, it does not matter if you have multiple sourcing point. Do you really think that multiple sourcing is the solution, especially considering the capital expenditure from Jijo Fanikar? So I think this is an add-on to our debate, and this goes to Lorenzo to start with.
Sure, I think it's a good question to me because we experienced this out of China first when we had, for example, if you think about single sourcing, that's meant that if you were supplying your products from China, you would have had a problem. Whereas if you had suppliers from multiple locations, you would have not incurred into the same issue. So this is a case in point where single sourcing from a geographical perspective may not necessarily be the way to go. Then as the virus became a pandemic, of course, there was a crisis of demand. So you had supplies available, but no demand. So that's another story. But single sourcing sometimes can help on the negotiations for sure, but at the same time can be a penalizing factor. So I'm not saying it's the only way to go is to have multiple suppliers, but at least if you have single sourcing, you may have one supplier that provides goods from multiple locations. And this is, for example, what happens in the electronics business. You have big corporations who have multiple manufacturing locations across the globe. So if one is down because the factory is down or because the logistics and the physical transportation is down, then you can have same products applied from other locations. So again, even the single sourcing versus multiple sourcing can be looked at number of suppliers or number of locations supplying products from the same supplier. So there's options that have to be considered regarding the products you're handling, the proximity to your customer, understanding where demand is. So a lot of factors have to be taken into consideration, which is why I think the S&OP becomes key here, because you really have to put together customer demand and supplies to really find the optimal way that finds also good compromise with cash flow and working capital and lead time when this is the case.
Krishna, what is your views on that? Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, so this source decision can be taken by people for a variety of reasons. It's not just the cost. It could be variety, it could be access to the raw material, it could be the specialization of the people in that area. For instance, if I want to take Egyptian cotton, I will have to go to Egypt. I cannot go to Bangkok to buy Egyptian cotton. Maybe I can buy it from a trader there, but I cannot get the Egyptian cotton in Bangkok. So my dependency on one region is not necessarily a cost decision. It's actually a complex mixture of cost, availability of raw material, availability of skilled people. What else are you buying from that region? Because that possibly gives you economy of the scale. You may not be buying only one product. You may be buying multiple products. It gives you economy of scale when you actually ship products in. You may not be buying one product from China. You may be buying hundreds of it. Right? So there is no right and wrong answer actually. I mean, I wish there could be one ideal answer that no, this is it. But it's going to be a case where if it's purely going to be for the cost, it might possibly allow us to look at some kind of de-risking, looking at possibly alternative source of supply. But if it's going to be specialization, one single specialization, it's still going to be a challenge for the time being, unless we come up with something like an alternative. And
all right, I think I'll take the next question.
The cost will be always pushed by the customer. The customer is the king. So if the customer is not going to accept a higher price, then you will be pushed back to look for more and more cost efficient means. Either it could be in production or in your sourcing side. So in a way, customer
Shailen,
demand actually pushes the supply chain decisions.
Right. Thank you, Krishna. Let me go to the next question. The approach till now from companies was to centralize complexity and decentralize fast moving closer to the markets. Do you see the changing now with more reliance on local sourcing from Chetan Shah? I think we have said this reason does not believe, but at least is there any way to answer this question? What about Khalid? Can you take it?
Yes. So again, as I mentioned a few times, the answer and localization, moving close to the consumer, it's not for everyone. So it's you need to have the right scale, you need to have the right value to justify, or volume to justify this. Maybe it makes sense for companies with high volume, like beverages, for example, very fast moving product that consumes every day. Others with a very complex operation, you need to have high skill, you need to have high investment. You will still need to have it as a single source, or at least few multiple source, but it's not for everyone.
All right, thank you, Ahmed. Let me go to the next question. This question is from Ahmed Hamasi. Indeed, the flow of information from suppliers to customer, whether downstream or upstream, is the ultimate goal. My question is, are you facing issues in FMCG industry, for example, to transform from Excel files to WMS or planning tools like the Mantra to have a consensus forecast due to lack of investment or top management not convinced on ROI? So I think I can take it to Khalid again.
Okay, so again, we didn't reach this stage yet. So you know, that's an issue that you usually face during your initial setup with a supplier or with the customer, the ways of working. So do I get it as an email? Do I get it as a system signal? Do I get it as Excel sheet? Couple of decades before, we used to get it as faxes and so this issue you do or of the formatting and so on, usually you face it during the initial setup. After a while, that's will be the ways of working. Eventually, I think this will be a challenge with going to having the full supply chain end-to-end integration, as we mentioned before, because there will be a multiple platforms across the customer, the supplier, the manufacturers, and so on, and the interface between these platforms and the level of maturity between the companies, this will cause an issue. This will not be an easy solution, but I guess this will be a lot of investment required in terms of technology, and a lot of investment in terms of people training to upgrade the skills as we mentioned before.
Shailen, can you give your perspective as a warehouse head?
Yeah, I think most of the things we have discussed, but flow of information will be very important. Transparency across supply chains will be very important. And this is a weak point with most of the companies. So that needs to be addressed. And across the supply chain, you know, from, as I said, upstream, downstream, you know, if you have a clear visibility, a large FMCG company like, you know, what Khaled is managing, I think it will help in a big way.
All right. Thank you, Shailen. I think there's one question that has, not been addressed in the whole process. I see a little bit of question. I'm modifying the question and saying that what has happened to air and sea cargo in Middle East during this period of time? How have the trend been? And how do you see the unfolding of this trend as a normal transportation modes practices? Shailen, I'll start with you again.
I think, let me take this. I have some very interesting data on air cargo. Yeah. So air cargo fell by almost 31%, the volumes. But as we are aware that 50% of the air cargo is transported in passenger aircrafts. So the capacity also fell by 50%. So this 50% still created a spike and a demand supply gap, because the demand for pharmaceutical doubled, and all the pharma items from China and other places which were earlier moving by sea started moving by air. So the demand doubled and the supply fell by 50% overall. So despite that, we have seen the spike in cargo rates, that air cargo rates have doubled, tripled, and in some cases regional airlines, you'll be surprised that regional airlines have really come to the rescue, because the larger airlines were facing challenges, and the smaller airlines, which were easy to faster convert their passenger planes into more cargo, they were a winner. Earlier they were struggling with pilot shortage, spare part shortages, and all those things which were a thing of the past. So air cargo spike and air cargo demand is here to stay. It will only go up. More and more goods. Earlier we never thought that commodities or food items which don't need cold chain will move by air. Now so many things are moving by air that it's really difficult to imagine. But I think that will also help in lean management of your inventory, because you can get it faster from the origin. So I think overall it's a good thing for the air cargo, and the demand will remain high.
Thank you, Shailen. I think we have come to the end of the discussion and question answer session. I thank all of you for bringing a lot of insight. I think few insights that we have really come to is important to summarize. As we started with de-risking policies, and a lot of you talked about the business continuity plan, I think Shailen brought about, and so did Lorenzo, about the different supply chain ties that need to be understood in the process of planning your supplies. I remember in one of the earlier tsunamis, what happened was IBM 2014th tire supplier did not have the material needed to go into the building of the chip, and they had a complete discontinuity in a so-called very well executed business continuity plan. We need a mapping till the last tire, and we need the mapping across the tire, as Baljeet rightly said, a connected planning approach which connects your, I would say, connects your customers, the changing dynamics that happens with lean and more agile approaches that can be brought into together. And knowing this, you secure your warehouses, you secure your transport based on real time. There is a real time rerouting of the transportation network. You have your production and distribution network aligned to this. Your factories are smart and build these trains, and your factories knows based on your production bill of material, how much is one needed, what is the bill of material of that product, what is the bill of material of that product, goes on till the last tire. I think supply chains will see a very, very different designs, along with very well interconnected logistics networks. And every logistics mode would be a network, and the cost and service in terms of time it takes to really reach that would also matter in a big way, as you see it in UAE. I heard it from Shailen that some element of air cargo will replace sea cargo because of the speed and the time that it takes to reach there and be there. And any life-saving drugs anyway goes into air cargo, but there are so many other revolutions that are happening. I think supply chains are going to be quite similar. Forecasting may not be there. We will come to some normal. There will be some normal in the business. But what would happen is that these are trends from the current pandemic, where we have learned our vulnerabilities. We have tackled our vulnerabilities unknowingly and somewhat knowingly. In the near term will become a practice, along with some amount of deterministic and some amount of more agile and reactive resilient policies. So I thank Shailen, I thank Baljeet, I thank Mike, I thank Lorenzo, I thank Khaled and Krishna for being a part of this lovely panel, and thank you for all your great insight. Jaisal, it's up to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I once again thank all the panelists for being there and sharing us wonderful insights on as to reimagining the supply chain and logistics post-pandemic. I would also like to thank our strategic partner, Pedicin and Partners, for their support for our Gulf Town Hall series. Thank you all the attendees for being there. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and do visit our videos on YouTube. I would like to thank, last but not the least, the entire ISCM team for your support and for making this happen. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh, for inviting us.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.